Now you should have a copy of the most recent magazine and of the previous one. It's not really related to my talk, but I will refer to one of the pages inside as an example of a design as we go along. Now I'm here to talk about a very influential 20th century patron of design and the arts, Frank Pick, who you may not have heard of. He was not a rich banker or an industrialist, nor was he from a rich family, but he became influential by spending other people's money in pursuit of a specific vision. Now, before I move on, I should just say a bit more about the magazine. We launched at the beginning of last year, and we've so far produced 4 issues. Our aim is to produce 3 issues a year, timed around the academic terms, although I have to admit that we did skip 2 earlier this year because of time pressure from my other projects. And we're distributing the magazine at selected venues and public events in London. Our aim is to cover all the topics that are listed here on the slide through both features and reviews of books, films and exhibitions. Now, Martin Luther was a brave man with a lot of acumen and courage in taking on the church authorities of the time, but he needed a patron. Without the backing of rich, powerful members of the nobility of his time, his career would have been cut quite short. And, well, here's somebody else who... Galileo wasn't actually burnt at the stake, but some of his friends were. Hence the importance of the patron. Now, the fellow on the left is Maecenas. Now, he was a rich man of the early Roman Empire, whose money... He was a landowner, and his wealth came from agriculture and from agricultural rents. He sponsored various Latin poets who naturally recognized his generosity in their works, setting the model for the rich man, generally a public figure, who knew what he liked. He could patronize whoever he wanted, commission and oversee the production of art and literature for his own personal gratification, interest and curiosity, also maybe to impress or outrage his rich neighbors. Another example is Lorenzo de' Medici. His activities as a public figure and patron of the arts distracted him from the banking business that was the main source of his wealth. Now, the other side of this coin is the patronage of the state. In the totalitarian regimes of the 20th century, Big Brother was the only legitimate patron, in fact the only possible patron, because nobody else had any private wealth. Art and creativity is put entirely at the disposal of the conventional views of the state about serving the community. Any subversive challenge by an individual creative person is liable to lead to banning or re-education or worse. Now, this poster on the left is a Russian poster from the 1920s, and I don't know Russian, so I don't know what that says, and it's a bit small as well on this screen. But you see that's the style of the 20s. The one on the right, which I like very much, is from 1958, and it promotes Chairman Mao's Great Leap Forward. The Chinese worker, the brave man on his horse, will outrun this fat little British colonial administrator on an ox. And the Chinese economy will overtake the British economy in 15 years, and that's what the banner says. Now, I should just say as an aside, in the 15 years following 1958, the Hong Kong economy, which was under the control of the British colonial administrators, in fact grew at 3 times the rate of the domestic UK economy. And in China, 30 million people died because of famine caused by their policies. But the reasons for that, well, we can't go into that now, and it's not really relevant to the subject. Now, quotation for you. If we are to achieve our hopes and forge the armour of light, everyone will have to work for the community in some way or other for nothing. What we seek can only be gained by voluntary work, which is the work of love. What excuse is there for relieving anyone of his share of tidying up the street, protecting his park or public garden, caring for his neighbour in misfortune, watching against abuse amongst those in authority, doing something to beautify and adorn his surroundings, which all may share? The author of that quotation was described by one of his most articulate admirers as the greatest patron of the arts whom this country, this century has so far produced, indeed the ideal patron of our age. If a Lorenzo can be conceived nowadays, it can only be in terms of big business or big administration, in terms of no leisure, no private glamour, and also, this is perhaps the most important point of all, in terms of architecture, with all the other arts serving her, and thus serving the community. And this sounds like a sort of continental, maybe Italian fascist communitarian propaganda from the 20th century, maybe with also a kind of communist undertone. But who said this? Well, the fellow on the left is Frank Pick, who was the vice chairman of London Transport in the 1930s. And his admirer is on the right, Nicholas Pevsner, the very distinguished historian of architecture and design. He said those words in an article about Pick published in the Architectural Review the year after Pick's death. Pevsner was in England as a Jewish refugee from the Nazi regime, and he had in 1939 been put in the very difficult position of internment as an enemy alien. Only the support of his friends and admirers in the world of art and culture, including Frank Pick and Lord Kenneth Clarke, had secured his release from his internment camp. There is a sense in which Pevsner, in praising his late friend, was repaying a debt. So who was Pick? Frank Pick was born in Lincolnshire in 1878 and educated at St. Peter's School in York, not far from where I was born. 4 years ago, I took this photograph of the commemorative plaque. This was commissioned by London Transport from the engraver Reynolds Stone and presented to St. Peter's School in 1951. And I should just say, as an aside, Reynolds Stone's most familiar work today is the official version of the Royal Coat of Arms, which is printed in the British passport, and this was a design introduced in the mid-1950s, still in use today, of course. Now, Pick trained as a solicitor in York, qualifying in 1902, but he did not practice, instead going into working for the local railway company. Now, this is a typical example of the railway poster of the early years of the 20th century. It looks like a Victorian illustration with this Victorian-looking family going for a jolly day out. Pick joined the Underground Electric Railways Company in 1906, and in 1908 was appointed Publicity and Marketing Officer. He worked on standardising advertising on underground platforms and signage, laying the foundations for the Underground's visual presence. This was a poster from 1910, so this is 2 years into Pick's incumbency as a marketing manager. But he evidently got a taste for the avant-garde, because this is 5 years later. We have a sort of journey through the planets on the left by underground to the fresh air. So I don't know why, I don't understand this poster, but this is a very, very well-known designer of the